Hello and welcome back or welcome to Version of Events. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Jessica, and this is News Roundup number 10. Woo!
Yeah.
News Roundup is where we take a dip into the cases that are on our mind or in the news.
It's so exciting to have reached our first little milestone.
I know, right? Number 10.
Yeah, it's exciting. And because it's a special episode, we are doing a one case review today, and that's Karen Reid.
Yep, that's right. Karen Reid, but we will still be presenting you with two more people in Missing and Marginalised this week. And like the case of Karen Reid and Boston cop John O'Keefe, they are both from Massachusetts.
So Jess is going to take the lead on this one as she followed both the trials and kind of studied this case, while I've been lost in the world of a deep dive script that I'm currently writing on Ruby, Frankie and 8 Passengers.
It's a very good script.
It's exciting.
Yeah, I did follow both the trials, all the pre-trial, all of that for my sins. So I'll break it down as best as I can for you. Let's get started. So for those of you who haven't heard, Karen Reid finally heard the words not guilty over 3 years after her Boston cop boyfriend, John O'Keefe, died on January the 29th, 2022. I'll run through the facts of the case, the basic facts quickly, because I appreciate that many of you will be familiar, and then we'll try and go through the trials and some of what happened around the case and outside the courthouse. So the night before, January the 28th, 2022, Karen Reid and John O'Keefe had been out for drinks with a group of friends or acquaintances at the Waterfall Bar and Grill in the town of Canton, Massachusetts. While they were at the waterfall, the group decided to go back to the home of Brian Albert, another Boston police officer, and his home is 34 Fairview Road. Karen had, the number is disputed, but around 9 alcoholic drinks, vodka sodas, and she drove to the home with John as a passenger. And when they got to the home, 34 Fairview, the position of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the prosecution, is that John got out of the car, he didn't go inside, Karen drove forward and then reversed backwards at over 20 miles an hour, clipping John, sideswiping him, and his elbow broke her tail light, which cut his arm, caused him to fall backwards and hit his head on the frozen ground. Karen then left him dying in the snow and drove back to John's home.
So the number's disputed, but she gets in a car and drives, having had 9 alcoholic drinks.
Yes, and by her own admission, in a clip that was played at trial, Karen said she was buzzed and she shouldn't have been driving and she wouldn't have gone on the freeway. And she also confessed in the same clip that whenever she does that, whenever I drink and drive, I'm always very careful. So this is not an exception.
No, clearly not an exception to the rule. Clearly something she does on a regular basis.
Yeah, and she's not the only person who was drink driving in this story, but she is the only person who stood accused of murder because she drove into John. So there are other people who don't come out of this story smelling of roses, but Karen was the only person accused of actually killing someone.
I see. Right.
The next morning at around 4 a.m, Karen went into John's niece's room because John's niece lived with him after her parents both died, and John took them in. John took in his niece and nephew, and Karen went into her room and said, "John's dead." This is 3.5 hours after she'd last seen him, by the way. So seemingly no real reason to think he was dead. You would, if my partner had done that, I would assume he's sleeping at someone else's house if I didn't know what had happened.
Yeah, it would have stood to reason that he would have gone into Brian Albert's home and maybe crashed on the couch.
Yes, exactly. And so that's where I think people are immediately, well, I'm certainly immediately suspicious of Karen going into the room and saying that, and also suggesting that John might have been hit by a snowplow driver. because there was a nor'easter coming in the night before, a big snowstorm, a huge blizzard,
Yeah,
and that's a huge factor in the case.
right.
Karen then phoned Jennifer McCabe and Kerry Roberts, who were two of John's friends. Jen had actually been out with them the night before and had gone into Brian Albert's home. And Karen said to both of them that she thought John was dead. Speculated, they say, that she could have hit him with her car. And then when the three of them drove to 34 Fairview, Karen says, "Stop the car," and jumps out and says that she saw John lying in the snow. And in one clip, she said he looked like a buffalo on the prairie and ran straight to him.
What a description.
I know, that's a buffalo on the prairie. It's not how you describe the person you love, in my opinion.
No, it's not. And I think I recall it being said that Karen was expecting to find him.
Yes, that's right. That was another clip that was played at trial, and she said, "I was looking to find him on the side of the road. I was expecting to find him."
This is all pretty damning so far to me. As someone who stood back from the case while it was all going on, this is the first time I'm kind of hearing it all. And so far, I'm very suspicious of Karen.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And why were you looking on the side of the road expecting to find him, Karen? Why would you be, if you saw him go into the home, which is what she now claims, she didn't at the time, why would you expect to find him at the side of the road?
No, exactly. That's just very odd.
But in many ways, the big story in this case, unfortunately, wasn't that night. It wasn't what happened to John O'Keefe, and it wasn't even really what happened in court. It was the movement outside the court. In April 2023, so over a year later, a defense filing turned what had appeared to be everyone to be a straightforward drunken hit and run into a wide-ranging conspiracy theory, alleging that some combination of the people inside 34 Fairview had beaten John to death, or that someone punched him and he fell backwards and hit his head, and also that he was attacked by the family dog, Chloe, which had caused the wounds on John's arm. And this is despite the fact that in the days after the crime, Karen's attorney, David Yannetti, said on the steps of the courthouse, "My client feels terrible. This was an accident. She had no criminal intent." He didn't deny that she hit him. He said she didn't mean to.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal for me, because it's quite a while later when they come up with this conspiracy theory. So when this filing is picked up by a profane Massachusetts blogger named Aidan Kearney, who goes by Turtle Boy, it became a cause célèbre. And this was also fueled by a federal investigation of the investigation. And this was launched for reasons nobody is quite clear on. But it does seem like it's possibly through Reed's attorney, the aforementioned David Yannetti, who has a connection to the Massachusetts State's Attorney, Josh Levy. And this investigation uncovered messages sent by then Trooper Michael Proctor. And there's some language here, so if you've got kids listening, maybe skip forward 30 seconds. Then Trooper Proctor referred to Karen Reed as a whack job cunt and said that she had a leaky balloon knot in reference to her Crohn's disease. This is gross. Those are not acceptable things to say for someone investigating her. And it became a big problem at trial.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine why. That's nasty. Like whatever you think of her, that's just not respectful and not right.
It's not. And we do, I think generally people understand that, to put it bluntly, cops and law enforcement can have foul mouths. And I think seeing what they see, you would, and from Trooper Proctor's perspective, he believed he had uncovered evidence that proved Karen Reed was guilty of murdering a fellow police officer. But you still can't say these things. And this is what prosecutors have said to us and said Brett and Alice, the prosecutors, have said on their show, this is the kind of thing that if you're prosecuting this case, this is a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine, because you can argue then it can be argued that they were tunnel visioned and just stuck on
Yeah.
one suspect instead of actually fully investigating the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was certainly what the defense argued. The federal investigation has now closed, however, and no action has been taken by the feds in relation to the investigation. Trooper Proctor was fired for the appearance of bias and for the content of his text messages, and also for sharing information about the investigation with them. But he was not fired for corruption or for planting evidence, because there was no evidence for either of those claims. For corruption, planting evidence, that wasn't uncovered.
Right, okay.
It's also interesting to say, in terms of the investigation being closed, we're recording on the 25th. As of yesterday, Aidan Kearney, Turtle Boy, has officially acknowledged that the investigation was closed months ago. He didn't tell anyone. He openly said, I didn't tell you. I couldn't tell you while the trial was on. But he knew that it was closed and went on with the pretense that it wasn't.
Well, that's just weird. That's just weird behaviour. Okay, you can't tell anyone, but you don't have to act like it's still going on at the same time. Just don't talk about it. It's very easy.
Yeah, 100%. So in June 2023, which is prior to the first trial, and obviously after Karen has been charged with second-degree murder, leaving the scene, and OUI manslaughter, Aidan Kearney organised this rolling rally. And what that was is he and his supporters drove around to the homes of various witnesses, people who were at 34 Fairview that night, yelling from a megaphone, accusing them of murder and being cop killers. So the Alberts have moved by this point, and Kearney and his loyal followers, they call themselves Turtle Riders, turn up to this rolling rally and drive around harassing witnesses, intimidating witnesses. He also turned up at a children's lacrosse game where witnesses Jen and Matt McCabe were watching their children play, and he called them cop killers in the stands.
This is outrageous behaviour. How old is this man?
He's in his 40s, you know.
Oh, he needs to grow up.
This is what you'd expect from gobshite in their 20s. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
No offence to people in their 20s, we're just old. But this is bizarre, yeah. But it's not just bizarre, it's potentially criminal. So in October 2023, Massachusetts State Police charged Kearney with multiple counts of felony witness intimidation, which carries, because it's a murder trial, carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. He also had to serve 60 days in jail after that time because he was accused of breaking a no-contact order, a restraining order, and his bail was revoked. Interestingly, though, it's not just that Kearney was doing this stuff off his own back. It's very clear that Kearney was colluding with Karen Reed directly, because the state police got Kearney's phone, and over 7.5 months, from May the 7th to December the 21st, 2023, 189 calls lasting more than 40 hours were logged between the two.
Of course they'd call and not put it in text message.
Yeah, some of it was using Signal, which is interesting. We'll come across Signal later as well.
Okay.
It's an encrypted app which you can set to delete your messages. And they also talked at times through an intermediary. Unfortunately for Kearney and Reed, the intermediary became an informant for the state police and passed on all their text messages. So that's how we know that Karen texted Kearney that she thought she'd hit something. She didn't say what. She also said that she was scared of going to trial and, quote, putting her life in the hands of 12 people too stupid to get out of jury duty.
Wow. That's...
I mean, I've shared that with people before and they said, oh, I might feel the same way. But I'm sorry, the jury system is at the heart of the justice system. It's a jury of 12 of your peers. They're not stupid. They're the people who you're supposed to trust to see if you did or didn't do something.
they're the ones that are supposed to, out of the prosecution and the defense, find the truth and without a shadow of a doubt make a make a verdict based on that.
Yeah, they're the finders of the facts, yeah. So, last year, despite her concerns, Karen Reid went to trial in the first trial, charged with second-degree murder, leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death, and OUI manslaughter. The prosecution in that trial laid on quite an expansive case. I mean, they called, I think, everyone who was at 34 Fairview that night. They called people who had been on holiday with John and Karen in Aruba a couple of months before. And frankly, I think they called an unnecessarily large number of witnesses, and that enabled the defence to push the conspiracy narrative quite effectively. They could cross-examine all these witnesses about various things they deemed suspicious, like butt dials or a dog being rehomed, for example. And ultimately, no one could come away from the first trial unaware of the defence theory. David Yannetti began his opening statement with, "Karen Reid was framed."
Oh my goodness, what a moment of real sadness and difficulty for John's mother, Mrs. O'Keefe Peggy. She must have looked crushed by that.
Yeah, she did. I remember seeing her. She shook her head and she just looked devastated.
It must be horrendous because I believe she lost 2 children
Yeah,
because John took in his niece and nephew, so I think she lost a child.
yeah, she lost her daughter as well.
Yeah, lost her daughter, and now she's lost her son. And she's having to sit in a court of law and listen to how Karen didn't do it, when in all likelihood she feels probably like Karen did do it.
I think it's safe to say Peggy O'Keefe, Mrs. O'Keefe, I should say, believes Karen Reid is guilty.
Yeah.
So again, during the first trial, when witnesses like Brian Albert and DEA agent Brian Higgins were called, they were questioned about destroying their phones before a court order to preserve the phones was enforced. And that's because there was a defence motion to get access to their phones. That motion was denied, by the way. So even if they hadn't destroyed the phones, the defence wouldn't have got access to them.
Okay.
It does seem likely to me that they were aware of the court order that was coming down
Right.
before they destroyed them. And that sounds bad. They probably shouldn't have known about it. But they didn't break the law in destroying their phones.
No.
In fact, Higgins sought permission before he destroyed his because it was after the motion had been denied. He upgraded before that, but he kept the phone.
I also think, they're being accused of murder by the defence for months on end. You'd do the same thing, really, wouldn't you? You'd get rid of...
100%,
No.
yeah. I don't want to help the defence. You don't want to help the defence out calling you a murderer when you know you haven't done anything. And we know that they use any little thing that they find
Yeah.
on people's phones when they do get access to them to demonise them. And when I say any little thing, I'm not talking about Michael Proctor. That's a different animal. But there's things on Jen McCabe's phone, for example, that they've used to portray her as a conspirator. And I'd be very tempted to get rid of my phone. And they shouldn't have known the order was coming down. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter
Yeah.
because the defence were denied access to them anyway.
Yeah. In which case, it's their property and their choice to destroy it or not.
Yeah, 100%. Now, for anyone who watched the first trial, you cannot have forgotten about Trooper Paul. Oh, Trooper Paul. He was the Commonwealth's crash reconstruction expert, but he's a state trooper and he has qualified in these things, but he's not.
Okay.
This is not his area of expertise, really. This is something that he can do. And now, as it turns out, spoiler alert for the second trial, a lot of what Trooper Paul said turned out to be correct. according to other experts. But he was not a good witness. I think Trooper Paul may have a speech impediment, which obviously makes it more difficult for him to testify as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
And he got shredded on cross-examination, really. Alan Jackson was asking him various questions like, did John do a pirouette? How did he end up here? And Trooper Paul would say things like, I don't know how it happened, it just did. And
Okay.
it's not, it didn't work.
That's not going to convince the jury, is it?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. Although apparently the first jury saw it as kind of a wash because there were other experts, the ARCA experts, and the jury just pitted them against each other and said, we don't know, because the ARCA said the opposite. But ARCA are a very big deal to the defence and what the Free Karen Reid crowd, the FKRs, and what the FKRs will often say is, science proves that the car didn't hit John O'Keefe. And just to address that bluntly, science doesn't say that. ARCA says that. Other scientists say that the car did hit John O'Keefe. This is how expert testimony works. One side gets an expert will say one thing, one side gets an expert will say another, and you assess their credibility. And that can be assessed on various things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Trooper Paul, you might say, even though, as I say, he got a lot right, you might say he's not particularly credible because he was not a great witness or not as qualified as ARCA. But that doesn't mean that science says John wasn't hit by a car.
Yeah.
So yeah, the ARCA were supposedly independent. They were from the federal investigation. And their conclusion was that there was not a collision between Karen Reid's Lexus and John O'Keefe.
Okay.
And that's a big problem. And I mean, while we can point out that there does appear to be a link between Karen Reid's defence and the federal investigation, and also from certain comments that were made pre-trial and during trial, it really sounds like ARCA only got information from the defence, not from the Commonwealth.
Right.
Because they didn't ask the Commonwealth for anything.
But
it was still a big problem.
Yeah. That's a really big problem. And I'm guessing, I'm remembering rightly here, the jury was a hung jury, and that's how we ended up with the second trial.
Yeah, a mistrial was declared after they sent back, I think, their third note saying they were deadlocked. The judge didn't poll the jury. They weren't asked if they were agreed on any counts. And the defence went straight out on the courthouse steps to celebrate, because even though they didn't win, they didn't lose.
Well, that's true. They must have known that another trial would be impending.
I think they did. I think they assumed it would go to another trial. But there's always the possibility that the case gets weaker somehow or counts get dropped. I actually think that's what informs the things the defence did next. Because jurors began coming forward to the defence, not to the court, just to be clear, to the defence, and saying that actually they had all agreed not guilty on second-degree murder and leaving the scene. Because they thought that, and they were split on manslaughter about 9-3 in favour of guilt. Because the majority of them thought that she had hit John, but didn't know it. And obviously for it to be murder too, or you have to know that you've hit him. And for leaving the scene of an accident, you need to know as well.
And you have to know that you've done it. Okay, that's fair enough.
But the problem is, the jury have been dismissed by the time they're saying this. They're no longer a jury, so they can't render a verdict.
No.
But the defence made a big stink about this, and they filed for the charges to be dismissed. As stated, the jury weren't polled. And also, and people like to say, why didn't the judge ask if they were agreed on any counts? Okay. If she had done that, and the jury foreman had said, oh, actually, yeah, we're agreed guilty on one of the charges, that would be the first appeal issue, the judge saying this to the jury. Judges have to be really careful when they're speaking to jurors. This is part of the reason jury questions never really get answered properly.
Okay.
Because if it seems like the judge is pushing a particular verdict, appeal.
Yeah. Yeah, of
I'm not.
course.
So I don't think the judge had. I don't think the judge really did anything wrong. In hindsight, yes, I wish she had polled the jury. But I don't. I don't necessarily believe that the jury were unanimously not guilty on these two charges. And that's not because I necessarily think they're lying, and this is supported by Massachusetts case law in similar situations, where in one case, for example, the jury foreman had actually had a signed verdict slip saying not guilty, and this was found afterwards. The jury said, yeah, we agreed not guilty. That was still not considered a verdict because they'd been discharged.
Yeah.
And because part of the reason for that is once they're discharged, they're no longer a jury. But also, when there's multiple counts, juries can come to what's called a compromise verdict. They're not necessarily supposed to. It's not, you're supposed to find it on the facts. But if let's say the split was 9-3 on manslaughter. Some of those 9 who think she's guilty might have also really believed, yeah, she's guilty of murder, she's guilty of leaving the scene, or of one of those two. But they might have been willing to say, okay, we will vote not guilty on these charges if you vote guilty on manslaughter. That happens.
Okay.
And I think that is very possibly what happened. That at one point, perhaps the jury got close to saying not guilty on those two and guilty on the other, but then that collapsed because 3 jurors didn't want to vote guilty on manslaughter. Ultimately, we don't know. And to an extent, it doesn't matter because they weren't a jury. And that's why the courts rejected that argument that she had been acquitted.
Yeah. I see.
So yeah, Karen Reid was retried this year. And this time the prosecution case looked very, very different. In the first trial, as mentioned, a really wide-ranging case was presented by Assistant District Attorney Adam Lally. A lot of people said Adam Lally was boring. I liked him. I nicknamed him Lally McBeal. That's a very current reference there to a legal comedy. But, and I have to say, in that trial, I do think they proved their case for at least manslaughter and leaving the scene. Murder 2, maybe not quite. The jury didn't agree, and, that's how it is. But in the retrial, Karen Reid 2, Electric Boogaloo, Special ADA Hank Brennan was appointed. Now, Brennan is primarily a defense lawyer. He represented mob boss Whitey Bulger, actually, a famous Boston mob boss. And when I saw that, I thought, the mob don't get bad lawyers.
Yeah.
And he was indeed very good. And as much as I like Lally McBeal, I do think that Hank Brennan did a better job. And so the Aruba witnesses from the holiday weren't called, which I think was a good decision. They didn't add much. The supposed conspirators weren't called from inside the home, so the defense couldn't bring in the conspiracy so effectively at all. The jury in the second trial, I don't believe, heard about the phones being destroyed. They certainly didn't see Higgins cross-examined about his attempts to begin a relationship with Karen Reid. They did hear about it, but through another witness. And there was very little testimony, if any, about the fact that the police did not search the home.
See, that really interests me because there was a body outside the home. So why didn't they search the home?
That is a great question, and it's a really common question. In my opinion, it's straightforward to answer, although it does sound counterintuitive. And this has been backed up by various legal commentators, and more importantly, by the audit of the Canton Police Department that was carried out regarding this case. There was no probable cause to search the home. And I can see why that sounds ridiculous. There's a body outside. But think about it. If someone is dead outside a home, that in itself is not evidence of a crime inside the home. And there's a really high bar for probable cause to search someone's home. It's kind of, I don't think this is called the castle doctrine, but it's similar to it. Your home is your castle. It's your abode. It's very
Yeah,
private. You have to have a good reason to search someone's home.
sure.
And for those who follow the Delphi case of Richard Allen, the murderer of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, there were numerous what's called a Franks motion, which is to suppress the results of a search warrant or an arrest warrant because it was faulty, the judge had been misled, not all the evidence had been included, because you have to include evidence that might exculpate the person being accused.
Sure.
So you're trying to get a warrant to get in this home, right? And so look at the facts. He's outside. There's pieces of red tail light around his body. He's missing his shoe, which is common in people who've been hit by a car. They've been knocked out of their boots, is the saying. And he's been there all night. And his girlfriend, who dropped him off, is running around, has a broken tail light, and she's screaming, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him."
Yeah, fair point.
If you put all of that in the application for a warrant and take it to the judge is going to say, well, I can't get you a warrant to go in the home. I can get you a warrant for her arrest.
Yeah, and to get into her car.
Absolutely, to get her car. The murder weapon.
Yeah.
Alleged murder weapon.
Yeah. Well, I think, okay, it's fair to say, I think he was hit by a car. So what I will concede on is the fact that she was buzzed, in her words. She was buzzed. She was driving slowly, but still drunk.
Yep.
She could have hit her taillight elsewhere. It could have been another car that hit John O'Keefe. I'll maybe concede that, though it doesn't seem likely to me, because of her telling people that John was dead long before they ever knew that he was dead.
Yeah.
So she must have known something.
Well, that's how I feel as well. In terms of the search in the home, by the way, it was pointed out and it was testified to at trial. Brian Albert recently confirmed it in an interview too. The police did go into his home to speak to him, and they saw nothing suspicious, nothing amiss inside the home.
Right, okay. Which makes sense because we've got all the evidence leading to the idea that this happened outside. Not inside.
Yeah. So the testimony at this trial, as stated, was very different. There were far fewer witnesses, but as mentioned, we heard from several witnesses who said they heard Karen Reid say, "I hit him," at the scene repeatedly. And on that note, by the way, another big change from trial 1 was the use of the clips of Reid during various interviews, in which she made some startling admissions. For example, firefighter Timothy Nuttall testified that Karen said repeatedly, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And Alan Jackson spent hours, literally hours. I think there was a re-recross and a re-redirect on this witness. It was wild. And all Alan was saying was like, "Did you hear I hit him, or did I hit him?" And by the way, those are both very damning, especially if you're saying you saw him go in the house.
Yeah.
So if you saw him go in the house, how could you think you'd hit him, Karen?
Yeah. No, exactly.
But after Alan Jackson spends all his time cross-examining Timothy Nuttall, Hank Brennan plays a clip of Karen Reid saying in one of her interviews, "I know I said I hit him."
Yeah, I really thought that those interviews would be her downfall.
Yeah, so did I.
Never said that, so the closest I was to saying was, I know I said I hit him, but did I really say it as many times as law enforcement's claiming I said it?
Jennifer McCabe, John's friend, also testified. And she said that she heard Karen Reid say, repeatedly, "I hit him." And in the morning, after Karen had picked her up and taken her to the scene and they'd found John, Karen asked her to Google hypothermia, how long it would take someone to die in the cold. Jen mistyped the word how, so the search read, "Hos long to die in the cold." And this search was apparently part of the reason the previous grand jury upped Reed's charges to murder 2, because it showed consciousness of guilt. It showed that she knew or believed John O'Keefe had been there since she left him at 12:30 because she hit him.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me too. The defence, however, had argued that based on a misreading of the forensic report from her phone, that the Hos Long search was done at 2:27 a.m., which of course is long before John's body was found and long before anyone except Karen, allegedly, knew that anything was wrong with him. And in trial 1, the defence expert, using that term loosely, to be honest, Richard Green, testified that the search was done at 2:27. But in trial 2, however, Richard Green was on the witness list, but he was not called to testify. That means that the defence essentially conceded that yes, the search was done at around 6:20 in the morning.
That's wild.
Yeah. So that was a huge thing. People print Turtle Boy printed T-shirts that said Jen McCabe Googled Hos Long to die in the cold at 2:27. Jen was referred to as the leader of the conspiracy because of this, and the defence just basically conceded that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's absolutely mind-bogglingly wild, this case.
Yeah. But for a case that should be so straightforward, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Something else Jen said that was interesting was that she tried to get Karen to stop saying, "I hit him," because she was getting herself in trouble. And this was corroborated by an EMT at the scene, Katie McLaughlin, who said that Reed, quote, repeated, "I hit him, I hit him. There was a woman next to us who told her to calm down, stop talking, you're hysterical." And Karen repeated, "I hit him again." A police officer said, "You what?" And she repeated it again, "I hit him."
So, if she's a part of this conspiracy to kill John and cover it up, surely it doesn't make any sense that she's there telling Karen to shut up and stop saying, "I hit him." Surely she'd be sort of encouraging her to keep repeating it, to keep saying it, especially in front of police officers.
Yeah, like, "What did you say, Karen? Say that again. I didn't quite hear you."
Yeah.
But no, Jen tells her to stop. And this is bizarre. Turtle Boy Kearney has referred to Jen McCabe as the quarterback of the conspiracy, the key player. Yeah, it's really hard to fathom Jen as the quarterback when she gave her phone to law enforcement. We know the Bryans didn't, and they've given various reasons for that, including they're undercover police officers. They don't want stuff like that, their undercover work being exposed. But Jen didn't have anything like that. Jen gave her phone to law enforcement. That's how we know about this search.
So, yeah, I mean, being undercover police officers, you've got to protect your identity very carefully, because it could be really dangerous if stuff gets out. So, yeah, why would Jen hand in her phone if she's conspiring against Karen?
Yeah. And not just conspiring against Karen, conspiring to cover up John's murder.
Yeah.
There were also 2 witnesses for the Commonwealth who established that the search was done at around 6:20 a.m. So it wasn't just the defence didn't argue their point. There were witnesses who testified that they had no doubt that it was done at 6:20. They were Ian Whiffen and Jessica Hyde. Ian Whiffen also addressed a claim by the defence. This is a favourite claim of the Free Karen Reid crowd, that John went up or down 3 flights of stairs after Karen dropped him off. And the defense position was that this meant John went into the house, went up or downstairs, which would presumably mean into the basement and then up again. That's
Mm-hmm.
two. I'm not clear on where the third flight of stairs would be. But Ian Whiffen was able to tie the flights of stairs recorded on John's Apple Health data to the location data on his phone, and it showed that he was still driving in the car when those stairs were logged.
So clearly, there's not any stairs.
Yeah, that he was in the car at the time. It's based on the incline of the road, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ian Whiffen also showed the location of John's phone, and he said, overnight this is, and he said that his opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, was that after 12:32, John's phone was never used again, and it was outside all night. Now, the defense made a big deal of some less reliable location data, which showed that it could have been in the house for a few seconds at a time, really. But together, Whiffen testified that the bulk of the location data, the fact that the phone was in pocket state all night, means it was in his pocket or underneath John. It wasn't used, and the battery temperature dropped all night because John was dying in the freezing cold. Whiffen used all of that to say John's phone was outside and never went in the house.
Wow. It's the image of him dying in the freezing cold just is so sad.
Yeah, it's really sad.
And this evidence seems to be really strong in favor of prosecution. Showing
Seemed it to me.
Yeah, showing that the defense's idea that he went in the house simply didn't happen. So I do think that's interesting. But I think now's a good time to take a quick break and talk about this week's Missing and Marginalised folks. I'm going to start us off with Brianna Colon, who has been missing since May 20th, 2023 from Boston, Massachusetts. She was 16 when she went missing, and she's now 18. She's biracial, black and Hispanic, with brown eyes, and had pink hair and brown roots when she went missing. She's 5'7" and 150 pounds. If you see Brianna or you have any information about her disappearance, please contact the Boston Police on 1-617-343-4500. That's 1-617-343-4500.
Ariyona Watkins-Walker has been missing since May 31st, 2023 from Roslindale in Boston, Massachusetts. She was 16 when she went missing. She's now 18. Ariyona is black. She has brown hair, brown eyes, and a nose piercing. She's 5'4" and 110 pounds. If you see Ariyona or have any information about her disappearance, again, please contact Boston Police on 1-617-343-4500. That's 1-617-343-4500.
Okay, so Jess, you mentioned Kerry Roberts earlier on. Where does she come into everything?
Yeah, John's friend Kerry Roberts also testified because Karen called her that morning as well, and she went to look for John. And you know what? I felt she was really damning for Karen Reid. I think she's a real problem for the conspiracy theory because, well, she's got to know Jen and the Alberts over the past couple of years, 3 years. At the time, she wasn't friends with them.
Okay.
She didn't know Jen. She was John's friend. So why on earth would she be part of a conspiracy to frame Karen to help people get away with John's murder.
No, it doesn't make any sense, does it?
Doesn't make any sense, and I think that's why in the first trial the defense just didn't cross-examine her. I think they just thought, hopefully the jury forget about her. Kerry testified that Karen phoned her that morning at 5 a.m. and Karen yelled, "Kerry, Kerry, Kerry, John's dead." This is 4.5 hours after Karen had last seen John. It's not clear why she would be thinking that John was dead unless she knew. Kerry also testified that Karen told her, my tail light," and when she looked at it, she could see there was missing tail light pieces in the morning.
Wow.
So again,
okay.
the defense haven't explained how the tail light was broken. And her testimony got worse for Karen Reid. She continued, quote, "Karen pointed it out and said, 'Look, my tail light.' And she said, 'Do you think I hit him?'" So that to me is particularly damning, because it's not just Karen saying into the ether, "Oh no, could I have hit him?" She looks at her tail light, sees it's broken, and says, "Do you think I hit him?" And I think maybe that's the realization dawning.
Yeah, perhaps.
And again, so Karen says, "Do you think I hit him?" And again, if Kerry is part of the conspiracy, you'd think that she, like you would expect Jen to do, would want Karen to incriminate herself. And yet she, like Jen, discouraged Karen from thinking she hit him. She testified that she replied, "No, I don't think you hit him."
Well, yeah, why would she say that if she's, again, part of this conspiracy?
Yeah. So the medical examiner, Dr. Scordi-Bello, performed the autopsy on John O'Keefe. And I have to say she was a problematic witness for the Commonwealth. She has been misquoted by some as saying that John wasn't hit by a car, which is not testimony you would usually expect from an expert, something that definitive. But the fact is she didn't say that. She did say she examined John's legs and did not see any evidence of an impact site. Specifically, she didn't observe any bleeding, a bruise, or a fracture. But she also testified that she was looking for injuries from a frontal impact because most vehicle impacts are frontal, whereas the Commonwealth's theory was this was a reverse impact.
Well, not only that it was a reverse impact, but that it hit him on the elbow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a side swipe, or that, in the words of Karen Reid, she didn't hit him. Maybe she clipped him.
Yeah.
So she was a problem for the Commonwealth, but not an insurmountable problem, in my opinion. It's not like the Commonwealth's theory was that Karen had stabbed John to death and a witness stood up and said, "Well, he doesn't have any stab wounds." Car injuries from car strikes can be weird. Like, I mean, someone flipped his car out. This isn't a pedestrian strike, but a drunk driver flipped his car outside my sister's recently, crawled out the window and ran after flipping his car.
Yeah. It is weird, isn't it, how car impacts can either be really quite dangerous or you seem to escape with nothing but a scrape and a few bruises.
Yeah. I mean, for those who say it's impossible that this happened, I mean, it's just not. But you might think it's unlikely, and that's fine. We know it's rare and these injuries are unusual, but it's not impossible. And I'd just point out, did you see, Ellie, the plane crash in India recently?
Yes, I did.
And there was one survivor, a British man, who was in seat 11A, and he got out of the plane and he survived. This survivor, he walked away. The other day, he carried the coffin of his brother who died in the crash, which is tragic, but it shows people can be in horrible incidents and come away not severely injured.
Yeah.
And I just think, if you're basing this on the idea that John's injuries are inconsistent with a car crash, you can never convict people of loads of car crash injuries.
Yeah.
Because sometimes injuries are weird. It's one of the things that baffles me about this case. John got those injuries somehow. There was testimony they're not consistent with a fight. So something happened.
Yeah, something definitely happened. And in my opinion, he was hit by a car. Now, whether or not that was Karen Reid's car, again, I will concede there's maybe a question there, though the broken tail light and her running
Yeah.
around saying what she was saying does make me really question her
Yeah, I think,
telling the truth now.
yeah, definitely. So coming up to the end of the Commonwealth's case now, they replaced Trooper Paul at Trial 2 with two experts from Aperture, Shannon Burgess and Dr. Judson Welcher. Burgess was a really key witness because he found an SD card in Reid's Lexus's black box that hadn't been found before, and that contained some of the text stream data. And with that data, he was able to testify that at the time Karen dropped John off, which is when John's phone stopped moving and was never used again, didn't move until the morning, Karen Reid reversed at 24 miles per hour at the same time. And
Yeah,
I don't know how you reconcile that with her innocence.
Yeah, I don't either. That's very, very damning. I don't understand how she got acquitted.
That's where I am. You know that. That's where I am with this case. And also, Karen was asked about this data outside the courthouse, and she replied, "The data is the data." She didn't
So she doesn't
actively
deny
say no.
it.
Yeah, she didn't. She just said the data is the data, because she reversed at 24 miles an hour. Now, if you want to say that's just a coincidence, and it's a coincidence that John's phone stopped moving at the same time, fine. But I mean,
But
firstly,
what's the actual likelihood of it being
exactly.
a coincidence?
Exactly, and this is what, is that a doubt that someone could have? Yeah. Is that doubt reasonable? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
The other Aperture expert was Dr. Judson Welcher, and he did some interesting experiments. The blue paint experiment, people called it, where they put blue paint on the tail light of a Lexus, and he stood next to it, and the car reversed into him at about 2 miles an hour. And a lot of the FKR people were very disparaging of that experiment. But to be honest, I look at that and I see, okay, it might look a bit strange, but what he's just shown is that is the area where the tail light would make impact with John's body.
Yeah, sure.
And that is the area on John's arm where he had those injuries.
So, therefore, it can't really be a coincidence that
the tail light's broken.
The tail light's broken and John stopped moving.
Yeah. And Welcher's further testified that his opinion, to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty, is that Karen Reid's Lexus struck John O'Keefe.
Yeah, what can I say? I think that says it all, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very damning. It's very damning. And honestly, I thought they had the case pretty much won at that point. I mean, it's the end of the Commonwealth's case. You would expect them to be on top at that point. But I didn't. I felt it would have been proven. Easily proven. But one juror who's spoken out since the trial, that's juror number 11, Paula Sarageldin Prado, said that the jurors didn't think the data was credible because the timeline was changed during the trial. And that sounds bad. Now, in reality, it wasn't really changed. The experts found that there was clock drift on the Lexus clock, which is where the clock doesn't show quite the right time. And they were able to...
Hell, if they looked... Sorry, but if they looked in my car at the moment, they'd see that it's an hour out of what it should be.
Daylight savings time, yeah?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's an internal clock as well, and there's a drift on this clock. It's got the wrong time. But using other data and security footage and things like that, they were able to reconcile this clock drift and work out what it was. And they were able to determine almost to a second when the impact was. Now, you don't actually need to do that to prove this case, by the way. You don't need to be able to say, this is the precise moment when this happened. But they did. But the jury, apparently, at least this juror, didn't see it as credible. Because it was changed during the trial.
Wild.
And I just think, what can you do at that point?
Nothing, I don't think. I don't think at that point you can do anything.
Yeah. We're now on to the defence case. And I'm not going to talk about every defence witness, I'm sorry. But I will talk about as many of them as I can. I don't think the first one, De Sogra, added very much. But they did have a witness, Brian Lucky Lothrum. And Lucky is a character. Lucky is a snowplow driver who ploughed Fairview Road that night, and he said that he didn't see John's body on the lawn. And he's changed his timeline a few times, but that's what he testified to in both trials. He also said that he saw a Ford Edge car outside the home at one point, and it was parked there, and it shouldn't have been because of the storm, but he didn't report it.
Mm.
And that's his testimony. And obviously, if Karen had hit John, his body should have been on the lawn.
I see.
However, the same night, Lucky drove into a basketball hoop.
Oh.
He drove into a basketball hoop in someone's garden.
Oh dear.
So yeah, I'm not sure how much we should trust Lucky's eyesight. There was a moment during the first trial where he wasn't able to read the screen. And
yeah. Okay.
And also just like he's concentrating on the road, surely. Like I wouldn't
You would think so.
Like I would almost be more surprised if Lucky had seen a body in their front yard. And if he had, what would you expect him to do? It's someone who testified. Most of the people who left the house didn't see anything. One witness testified that she had seen what looked like a strange lump, I think the word she used was. And that turned out to be John. What would you expect Lucky to do if he had seen what was, and I mean no disrespect to John saying this, but what would have looked like a lump in the snow? What would Lucky have done?
Well, yeah. Exactly. He may have just thought that there was something under there that the snow covered, but you don't assume that's the body. You don't automatically go, "Oh, look, there's a lump in the snow. That must be a body."
Not even the biggest true crime fans think lump in the snow, body.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have people said, "I thought it was a mannequin. I thought it was a mannequin." It's never a mannequin, by the way, guys. If you're walking your dog,
I actually have a sticker. Says,
you have a never a mannequin sticker.
Yeah, it's never a mannequin.
Right. Sorry. Back to the serious stuff, guys. Another thing Lucky was asked about was if he had been intimidated by anyone to testify, any bloggers maybe. And Lucky said no repeatedly. And here's the thing: intimidation. Whether or not you feel intimidated or threatened is kind of a personal thing. If you don't, then you don't. If Lucky didn't, then he would say I didn't feel threatened. But objectively, factually, we know that Lucky was threatened. Aidan Kearney, Turtle Boy, had a go at Lucky on his channel. He, after saying that Lucky's wife has died, really sadly, Lucky's wife passed away. Turtle Boy says this and then says, "Lucky, you're a towny piece of shit." I mean, he's so gross.
Turtle Boy's just describing himself there.
Yeah, well, quite. But worse than that, because that's not a threat. That's just being an arsehole. But he also said that if Lucky didn't talk to the defence, he would expose some secret about Lucky that he happened to know. And we don't know what that is, or if there even is a secret. But we know Turtle Boy said it. And we know after that, Lucky started talking again.
I just... this bloke's despicable.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I feel kind of sorry for Lucky. I think he was taken advantage of.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it. I mean, he clearly was struggling with grief when all of this went on for his wife, and then to have Turtle Boy being an asshole
Yeah,
on top, it might have been too much
too much to handle. Yeah,
pressure.
yeah. So, I mean, I actually, as it happens, I believe Lucky. I don't think he saw a body. I don't think he saw John's body. I just don't think that he was looking either. And
No, I agree with you. I don't see why he, why
he's
would
not
he have been
lying.
looking for a body in the snow?
Yeah,
That would be an odd thing to be looking for
yeah.
when you're a snow plow and you're just trying to get the roads clear.
Yeah, driving along in his Franken truck, as he called it.
Yeah, bless him.
Lucky is. I think Lucky's
Lucky
quite
sounds
likable.
lovely.
Yeah, he's quite likable, and I feel sorry for him being dragged into this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's worked out okay for him. People, love him now, give him money. There's pictures of young women and some not so young women, kind of hugging him outside the courthouse, wearing T-shirts that say "I should be so lucky." And just on that, by the way, though, it's not a party; it's a murder
No.
trial.
Yeah.
But it's easy to see how Lucky was dragged along with this, really.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's not a party. And perhaps that wasn't appropriate outside the courtroom, outside the courthouse, where this murder trial was going on. But given everything he's been through, I am glad that Lucky does have some support from the public.
Yeah, that is nice. Yeah. We also heard, and this has to be the most memorable moment of the whole trial, for me anyway. Officer Kelly Dever, not Diva. She doesn't like that. Kelly Dever.
Fair enough. If it's not your name, it's not your
fair.
name.
You know what? It is fair. So the reason I say that is because Alan Jackson, the defense attorney, kept mispronouncing her name as Diva, and at one point she said, "Just like you can't remember my name, I don't remember what happened."
Oh,
yeah. Very, very
good
sassy.
for her.
Yeah, I thought so. So Kelly Dever had previously told the FBI during the federal investigation that she saw Brian Higgins and Chief Ken Berkowitz go into the Canton Police Sally Port. That's a garage, by the way, UK listeners, with Karen Reid's Lexus for, quote, a weirdly long time. And that's suspicious. Brian Higgins is a witness in the case. He had a kind of texty, flirty relationship with Karen Reid. He'd kissed her on at least one occasion. Karen was, he shouldn't have had access to it. But
yeah,
after giving this statement, Dever learned that she was mistaken. Her shift had finished before the Lexus arrived at Canton PD, so she couldn't have seen them in the Sally Port with the car. And she kind of, the way she put it on the stand was that it was a false memory. Now, I think false memory sounds a bit extreme. I think she's thinking of another day or earlier the same day, or I don't know. But the fact is, she wasn't there when the Lexus came in to the police department. So she couldn't have seen what they said she saw.
No.
And this is the most dramatic moment. Kelly Dever said on the stand that a male member of the defense team, quote, threatened to charge me with perjury if I didn't lie for you on the stand right now.
So basically, this just confirms my thoughts that the defense were just playing outright dirty.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And that's how I I felt it was very dramatic, and I felt like it was bad for the defence. And so did some people on the defence side. I mean, the lawyer Peter Tragos, said that that was a very bad call, although he did later change his mind. But Deva played differently for one juror, and again it's number 11, Paula, who said that she questioned whether someone with Deva's temperament should be allowed to be a cop and carry a gun.
Oh, for God's sake.
That's, ridiculous.
Internalized misogyny.
Yeah, a man speaking back to Alan Jackson like that would not have got the same response.
No.
But the thing is, Deva said on the stand, "I've got no idea why you're calling me up for this. I don't know why. I have nothing to do with this case." Which is true. She was asked about it. She got something wrong. She told them that it was wrong, and they still called her. But it seemed to have the desired effect, let's say. And presumably, jurors also compared her favourably with another defence witness, who was law enforcement officer Nick Barros. And his testimony was that when he saw Karen Reed's tail light before it was taken by police in Dighton, the tail light was cracked but not completely destroyed. He did also say that when he was shown certain pictures where you can see huge pieces are missing, yes, that's how it looked, but not as destroyed as we know that it was, and as you can see when the snow's been removed from it. And that's a problem, because if you believe Nicholas Barros that the majority of the tail light was still intact when it was taken, it kind of makes you believe that certain pieces must have been planted at the scene.
Okay. But all of this still means that Karen Reed's tail light was cracked somehow. And so far, the defence haven't really explained how that came to be. Did they manage to do that at all?
No, not really, and that's a big problem for them. Everyone accepts Karen's tail light was cracked somehow. Now, one explanation that they've put forward is that she bumped her car into John's home. That's later in the morning, before she drove to either Jen or Kerry's to get in the car with them and look for John. And you can see on the ring camera, yes, Karen does bump into John's car, John's Traverse, but it's a kiss. And Dr. Welcher and even a defence expert, Dr. Wolf, both testified that that bump couldn't have broken Karen's tail light.
Okay.
And despite their own witness saying this, the defence still argued in closing that it could have caused the tail light to break slightly. But there wasn't any testimony, any actual evidence to that effect. So their theory appears to be that, yes, the tail light cracked then, but it may have subsequently been smashed by law enforcement and planted at the scene. Now, presumably, then Trooper Michael Proctor would have to be involved with that. Although, given what Officer Deva told the FBI, Brian Higgins and Ken Berkowitz, the chief, appear to also be in the frame for possible planters. And that's what their theory comes down to. And this, I think, is why they go for the conspiracy. The tail light's broken. It got there somehow. It can't be from Karen. So there's a conspiracy.
Okay. Right. What they're saying is that law enforcement planted it at the scene. But what I can't get my head around in that case is how they had time to go and find Karen's car, smash the tail light, take the pieces, plant them around John's body,
where it had been,
where it had been, in time for it all to be discovered as it was.
Yeah, and so because of the snow, the tail-light pieces were under the snow. They weren't found at the same time as John's body. And also, bluntly, people weren't looking for evidence. They were trying to save John's life.
Sure.
But when the CERT team turned up later, the CERT team turned up at around slightly after the car was taken to the Sally Port. But the CERT team see these tail-light pieces. They find them. They find the first pieces. And
Okay.
there's not really time to get from Canton Police Department to Fairview in time to plant them. And also, the CERT team members are there. You're telling me that at least one trooper, presumably Michael Proctor, broke the tail light, either with someone's knowledge or without, took it to the scene, planted it under the snow, or kind of around, without either without these CERT team members noticing, or they knew and didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Either you're implicating way more people in your conspiracy, which is already a massive conspiracy, or you're saying that this entire team are completely incompetent.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And also, why the police are massive on catching killers of people that kill their own.
Yeah.
So why are they killing one of their own, apparently? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there's no... The motive... I mean, the defence have suggested various motives, including, I'm not kidding, including that they were fed up with John complaining about them walking on his lawn.
Wow.
It's insane. Another slightly more realistic, but not massively so, is that Brian Higgins was so jealous of Karen Reed and John, despite the fact that Karen Reed and John's relationship was on the outs. And we haven't really got into that because this episode would take forever. But Brian Higgins had been flirting with Karen. They'd had a kiss. And then Brian sees them at the waterfall, getting on, apparently, and is overcome with jealousy and decides he's going to beat John to death, I guess. It's bizarre.
It really is.
So the defence then also called Dr. Marie Russell, who is a former police officer and medical practitioner with a particular interest in dog bites. And she argued that the wounds on John's arm were scratches and bites from a dog. Now, there were no dog hairs found anywhere on John's clothes or John's body. There was no dog DNA on his clothes. And to me, that should be the end of the dog bite theory. Some people make a big deal about the fact that the Albert's dog, the supposed culprit, Chloe, was rehomed, but I don't think that's suspicious. What do you think?
I think that's interesting timing, but
Yeah.
based on the evidence, no, not massively. It doesn't strike a massive problem for me.
Yeah, and I think you're looking at the evidence in the right way. There's so much evidence against the idea of these being dog bites that the rehoming of the dog, okay, interesting. We'll take notice of it, but that she's not a salivaless, hairless dog.
No. Exactly. And you would expect to find saliva in the wounds or
on the shirt, on
bacteria in the room and on the surface of the skin.
Yeah.
So the fact that that wasn't found, I can write that theory off.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah. And you know what? The fact is, this was explained. The rehoming was explained. They said that Chloe had bitten another dog in a separate incident, and they decided to rehome her, and she went to Vermont. Vermont is lovely, I'm told. Lots of maple syrup. I don't think you're supposed to give that to dogs, but it is supposed to be very nice up there. And you know, I just think this is. I mean, I've never had a dog. I used to be quite scared of them. I'm not anymore. But I mean, it doesn't strike me as such a big deal as people are making it out to be.
No, it doesn't. to me either.
And what I'd also say is all the harassment that the Alberts have been through since this happened, and I can feel the anger coming into my voice because it upsets me so much. Had they not rehomed Chloe and tried to keep her through this harassment, they would have had to rehome her eventually because of the extent of the harassment that's been done to them. People outside their house yelling cop killers. I saw a clip the other day. Brian Albert is just sitting in a cafe trying to eat or have a cup of coffee, and someone yells through a bullhorn at him, cop killer. And one of these FKR people, the pink shirt people, would have tried to kidnap Chloe and, I don't know, prove that she was a new dog, or prove that, the wounds did come from her, or try and provoke her into attacking a person. So they could then say, look, she bit this person. She must have bitten John. And you know what? I'll say this. I'm glad that the Alberts rehomed Chloe before something terrible happened to her.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
I agree.
yeah. And another thing, while we're talking about behaviour of the Alberts that people say is suspicious and I don't think is, they didn't come out of the house that morning. Okay, so what? So what? By the
They were
time
all drunk and hungover, I imagine.
they're all hungover. They've all been out on the beers, When Jen goes into the home, and Brian Alberts talked about this in a recent interview, when Jen said John's outside and I think he's dead, this is at the point where John is already being taken into the ambulance. Brian Albert said in this interview, and excuse my language, he said, Jen, what the fuck are you talking about? Because he didn't click, it didn't make sense to him. But he said once he'd actually woken up and, come downstairs, the police were already in his home, and this was testified to. So I don't think it's suspicious that they didn't go outside. I think he was barely awake, and by the time Jen woke him up, it was over.
Yeah.
And also...
No, I agree.
And also, if he had gone outside, do you think the defence would be saying, oh, well, that's fine, there's nothing suspicious about that? No,
they'd be saying that's suspicious.
He's gone outside he's inserted himself into it. He can't win. And the other thing is that they sold their home. Now, this also has been explained. I don't think it's a big deal. They sold their home, moved away over a year later. And Brian Albert said that the reason for that is that he was told that there was, by his brother Chris, that he'd just sold his home and he got a good price on it. They had grown-up kids. I think some of the kids have moved out. They had this huge home. People do downsize and move when they get older.
Yeah.
Brian Albert's retired now. He's had a very long and storied career, and he's retired. He wants to move somewhere else. And again, by the way, if they'd have stayed any longer, they'd have been forced out by the FKR campaign against them.
Yeah, I think so.
Also, by the way,
I think so too.
If you ever murder someone in your house, which I don't think you should do, I strongly advise against it. I advise against murder altogether, actually. But if you kill someone in your house, don't sell your house, because then you lose the kind of privacy and interest over it. You no longer need to get a warrant for it. You can go in and look while it's being sold. There's open houses. And what happened in this case, we know what happened. Kearney and other defence investigators were able to ask the homeowners to go in. They went into the garage, and took pictures. There's supposedly a sample of carpet from the basement that Karen has after the carpet was ripped out. It's never been tested, and that's all been able to happen because they sold their home. And by the way, what has come of all that defence investigation about the basement and the garage? Nothing. Zip.
I think that we can put the dog bite theory to bed, but that does leave the question, what did cause the wounds on John? And surely that would have been tail light pieces.
Yeah, the broken tail light. That is the prosecution's theory. When Karen reversed into John, his arm broke the tail light, and that left these cuts on his arm. Now, I'm not saying that is what happened. I can see why some people think that's not how it would happen. People are concerned there's not a broken arm. There's little, if any, bruising. But I do think it's most likely. Now, Joseph Scott Morgan, who's a forensic pathologist, he's the host of Body Bags podcast, which is great. He said those wounds are not dog bites. He also doesn't think it's from the tail light. He knows more than me about bodies and wounds. And he suggested that it might be the underside of the car, which I don't think is the case because John didn't go under the car. Or he also said it could be a critter, some kind of animal, but
Well,
not a dog.
That's the most southern thing he could say, isn't it? Bless
Yeah.
him.
You can tell he's an Alabama guy. So yeah, he could be right, I suppose. Maybe an animal came and gnawed on John in the night. But I don't buy that because there's still no animal hair. And now this is interesting. There was pig DNA on John's shirt. A pig did not come along and bite John's arm.
No.
But it's presumably John had a bacon sandwich or something. But I do think the tail light is most likely. I find it quite compelling that Joseph Scott Morgan and Kenny Kinsey and another expert for the prosecution who didn't end up testifying, Dr. Cosgrove, all said these are not dog bites. But some people still maintain that they are, and I guess you can't convince everyone. But John's phone never went in the house. So how did Chloe get to him, if you think it's Chloe? That's my question.
Yeah. Yeah. If the door never opened, Chloe couldn't have got out, surely. So
yeah, they had an enclosed back garden. If they let Chloe out to use the restroom to do her business, it would have been in the back garden, not in the front where John was.
Yeah.
But yeah, a broken tail light brings us to the ARCA experts again. We've said before they were nominally independent, and that's true. They were hired by the federal government as part of their investigation of the investigation. And ARCA wrote their report apparently before being contacted by the defence, in which they concluded that John was not hit by a car. But in the first trial, ARCA testified they hadn't spoken to the defence and hadn't been paid.
Okay.
And Judge Canoni expressed scepticism about that in a sidebar, asking if the defence were really going to call a witness who they hadn't spoken to. And it turned out, of course, that spoken to was a very deliberate choice of words, because they hadn't spoken out loud. They'd only texted each other and emailed. And the defence seemed to think that that was okay.
That's interesting.
And as for not being paid, again, that was sort of true. When ARCA testified they hadn't been paid by the defence, they hadn't been paid yet. They were paid after the trial. But they were paid, and the defence didn't tell the court. And I think part of the reason they were doing this is because they thought they were probably going to win the first trial. So it wouldn't have mattered.
That's misleading.
Yeah, it's very misleading. But I think they thought they were going to win the first trial and it wouldn't have mattered. But they didn't. It was a hung jury and it all came out. Judge Canoni called them in for a voir dire of this ARCA expert. And so Daniel Wolf, Dr. Wolf, was called into this and he had to establish how he had communicated with and been paid by the defence. And it emerged that he had installed Signal, just like Karen and Turtleboy Kearney use, an encrypted messaging app. And this is interesting. He installed it because it was the preferred method of communication for Alan Jackson, Reed's first chair attorney.
That's not dodgy at all.
Well, yeah, but it gets worse actually. Dr. Wolf turned on automatic deletion of messages. That's after he deleted over 100 texts between himself and the defence.
So he turns on auto deletion of messages on Signal, which you have to go through 2 levels of settings to do that. It's not how the app is when you start it up. Like,
That's interesting. So yeah, that's not how it is. That's not how it starts. You have to make that setting. You have to put that setting on.
Yeah. Though you can
Well-
also put that setting on WhatsApp now.
Okay. So that definitely wasn't testified to by Dr. Wolf. He definitely did not state that he went out of his way to turn that on.
Yeah.
This is all very sus to me. So after the voir dire, Judge Clowney concluded that the defence had repeatedly misled the court and that it was deliberate. But she didn't kick the attorneys off the case, which I mean she could have done, although it might have been reversed on appeal. But she also didn't even stop Arca from testifying, which she also could have, although that opens up problems. The trial might have had to be continued while the defence tried to find another expert. Now, I'm hopeful that these ethical violations will be reported now, after the trial is over, and we'll see what happens. But the headline is, the defence got away with repeatedly misleading the court and the jury in the first trial.
Yeah, they did. They really did.
Yeah.
And that's worrying. I mean, it just shows they're not playing a clean game here. This is, I know I've said that before, but I feel like it's really being rammed home now just how dirty they played.
Yeah, I think that's very clear. So after all this came out, Arca were no longer independent. So they were hired by the defence openly, and they came up with a new report, and they did some new testing. And some people know why. You might be able to hear a little smile in my voice when I say new testing, because you might know where this is going. This included the infamous potato cannon, as described by Hank Brennan, which they used to shoot cocktail glasses at a tail light to see if it would break.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can get federal funding for that now, guys. Something that should be being done by teenage boys in the back garden.
Yeah.
So the theory was that maybe John threw his glass at Karen's car and that broke the tail light, because the defence needs to explain that tail light and they can't.
Yeah.
And Arca's experiment showed that that didn't happen. It didn't break the tail light. Their cannon didn't break the tail light. And so again, you've asked this before, Ellie, and I think we can finally say the defence never adequately explained how Karen's tail light was broken.
No, they clearly don't. That's worrying, really, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd think that was a bit more of a problem for the defence, but well, some of you know how we know how this ends, don't we? But Hank did play a clip where Karen helpfully admits that her tail light was broken at John's and that she pulled out pieces of it herself. So, not smashed by the police, not naughty Trooper Proctor, the big baddie. No, Karen Reed pulled those pieces out.
Maybe she planted them. I'm at a point now with this case where anything could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would Karen
by
Reed
the
do
way,
this?
I'm not saying that she did. I'm not
No.
seriously saying that she did. I'm just messing
It's
around.
bizarre. It's so bizarre. So Aperture's Judson Welcher, Dr. Welcher, he did the paint experiment. He didn't do any experiments with a crash test dummy. And he explained that. He said that they simply don't know enough about how exactly the car hit John to do an accurate experiment. But very helpfully, Arca did. They got a Rescue Randy mannequin, not quite a crash test dummy, by the way, and they stood him in the road with his arms sticking out, and they reversed him with a Lexus at 24 and 28 miles an hour. Ellie, I'm going to show you this clip, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Right, so you can see, Ellie, the car smashed into Randy, tail light broke. Ellie, what did you think?
I think that Karen Reid reversed into John O'Keefe and he broke the tail light. That's what I think.
I
Sorry,
think, yeah.
Karen.
Yeah, that's what happened. You can Arca showed this. They showed this in their own experiment, and it baffles me. This is Arca Testi. If you want to check it out, the car reverses in to rescue Randy. The tail light smashes, shatters everywhere. The dummy spins around, almost loses his shoes. And because John wasn't hanging in a suspended by a rope thing,
Yeah.
John would have spun around, fell and hit his head. Shoe comes off. Exactly what happened. Exactly what the Commonwealth said.
I still am baffled by the fact that she was acquitted. I really am.
Yeah, me too. And I think Hank Brennan must have felt the same because he played this experiment at the end of his own closing argument. And he highlights it. He says the tail light smashes and there's no lower body injuries on John's body.
Yeah.
So the jury went out to deliberate. They were out for 21 hours before they came back. They sent back 4 questions, and you could tell from the questions that they were not going to convict Karen on everything. It was becoming clearer and clearer that they were going to convict her of either nothing or just of OUI manslaughter, or just of OUI. And that's what happened. The jury came back not guilty on murder 2, not guilty on leaving the scene, and on the manslaughter charge, only guilty of operating under the influence of alcohol, not a collision, for which Karen got a year's probation.
It's insulting.
Yeah. And the questions they asked made me feel very concerned about the jury and how impartial they were. And since then, some jurors have been on a media tour and got paid quite a lot of money for their interviews, by all accounts.
Oh, that's not dodgy at all.
Yeah.
That's gross. This was a murder trial. This is not a story to sell.
Yeah. It's sad. And so, yeah, I have to say, and I'll be honest, I think some of the jurors, particularly juror number 11, Paula, went into this case with an opinion. I think others may have been influenced by the huge crowds of people outside the courthouse. Paula said that she stopped wearing pink during the trial because she learned it was the colour of Karen's supporters. She should have let the judge know that she learned that, and she didn't, by the way. She also referred to a movement to free Karen inside the courthouse. And she said that other jurors knew who Aidan Turtleboy Kearney was. And by the way, he was sitting there, Turtleboy, when Hank Brennan asked Lucky Loughran if he'd been intimidated, and Lucky said no. The jury knew who this guy was, who had been trying to intimidate people. And how can we expect them to come back with a fair verdict in those circumstances?
No, you can't.
There's also been other things that have been said that have concerned me. For example, that Paula said maybe the car touched John somehow, and that's how John lost his shoe. But then he went into the house, and which is bizarre. Like touched him somehow. So, like Karen said, clipped him. There was no evidence put before the jury that John went in the house, or even really any evidence that John could have been hit or clipped and still gone into the house.
Yeah.
And why would John walk around with one shoe off and one shoe on?
Well, yeah, quite, especially not in snow.
Not in the snow, no way. Paula also said that she trusted one of the witnesses most, Tess Chart. Tess Chart didn't testify in this trial. She testified in the first trial.
Someone was doing her own research.
I think so, yeah. She also said the jury were concerned about the amount of money spent on the trial, so they weren't going to hang. I'm sorry, that's outrageous. That shouldn't be a factor in your deliberations.
No.
It should be on the facts that have been put before you. But I think this might be worst of all. She said that when the judge excluded photographs of the inside of the garage, that created reasonable doubt. That's bad.
Mm.
The jurors should not be considering excluded evidence and why it was excluded as a factor in their deliberations at all.
No, because it was excluded, so therefore it shouldn't
Yeah.
be a part of it by its very nature.
Yeah. But so the case is done. The criminal case is done. There's still a civil case. We'll see what happens. But it is done. Just like when OJ walked and when Casey Anthony walked, the Commonwealth are not going to look for the real killers because they found the real killer. Her name's Karen Read. She was drunk, she hit John, and she left him to die. Jeopardy is attached, meaning that Karen Read cannot be retried. She could do an OJ and write a book called If I Hit Him. She could do an interview on TV saying she hit him.
Wow, she already did that.
Don't remind me. But it makes no difference. She cannot be retried for this murder. And the people who say they want justice for John and free Karen, it's over.
Yeah.
And it's
Sadly.
a tragedy for the O'Keefes.
Yeah, it really is.
Aidan Kearney's witness intimidation charges are still going. And, as we mentioned, we know how much he was talking to Karen. She could potentially be charged with the same thing. And remember, that carries a sentence of up to 20 years in prison. But I don't want to get my hopes up. I think the jury pool is thoroughly poisoned.
Yeah.
In favour of Karen Read.
Yeah, I agree.
The fact is,
I agree.
The case is over. And the verdict was not guilty. Her guilt was not proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
But I'd just like to say that does not make her innocent.
It does not make her innocent. And you know what? Regardless of the verdict, the facts don't change.
No, they don't. They absolutely don't. And I think now we'd like to play a clip that Hank used in his closing argument, and then we will get back to you.
John O'Keefe is not a body. John O'Keefe is not a buffalo on a prairie. John O'Keefe is a person, and he was murdered by Karen Read.
Right, so that is our Karen Read special. And you know what? I'm sure some of you have hate listened. And if you got to the end, thank you. And even if you only started, thank you, because the download still counts.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
More importantly than that, by the way, Missing and Marginalised was from Massachusetts this week. Because people in Massachusetts care about this case. I hope you care about the girls we told you about, the young women we told you about. I hope you care about Brianna Colon. I hope you care about Ariyona Watkins-Walker. And you can disagree with us on Karen Read. That's fine. But those girls matter.
Yeah, they do. They matter very much. They have families that are worried sick about them, I imagine. And anything that can be done to help would be a fantastic thing to come from this episode.
Yeah. And we'll finish, I suppose, by saying our massive sympathies to the O'Keefes.
Yes.
To Mrs. O'Keefe, Peggy, to Paul O'Keefe, and to the rest of the family as well, and John's friends.
Yeah.
John was a good man, and we've made it very clear what we believe happened. But whatever you believe happened, leave the O'Keefes alone.
Yeah. They need time to heal now. They need time to digest what has happened, and they can only do that if they are left in
alone.
peace.
Yeah. Right, well, that finishes off the episode. So as usual, guys, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
If you've enjoyed listening, please give us a 5-star rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also get in touch with us. Ellie, where can people get in touch with us?
You can get in touch with us at versionofevents@gmail.com or via any of our social medias. We are at version of events pretty much everywhere you can think of. We've also got a link tree now that's linked from our Instagram and our X account. So if you want to find us elsewhere but you're struggling, that's the place to go.
Yeah, and we can stick the link tree in the show notes, can't we?
Yeah, we can indeed.
So, guys, obviously we've only covered one case this week. I shall be back to covering anything and everything very soon. If you want us to cover a case that you're interested in, get in touch. And the cases for Missing and Marginalised we often get from listeners. So please, if there's a case that's not getting the attention, maybe even someone you know, a friend of yours, or someone from your town, your city, get in touch and we'll try to give that person some airtime.
Absolutely. Right, guys. Thanks for sticking with us, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you soon, guys. Bye.
Bye.